Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're journeying back in time, over 1,000 years ago, to a really transformative period in ancient Indian history. We're talking about the centuries right after the decline of a major empire, a time of profound change and the dramatic rise of new powers. Our central figure today is someone many might not recognize, but who is incredibly significant in shaping an entire region. Shashanka. We've pulled together insights from our original research and expertly adapted material to bring his, well, pretty remarkable story to life. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. Imagine a power vacuum so immense, it basically reshapes the whole subcontinent. And that's pretty much what happened after the mighty Gupta Empire began to decline, say late 5th century CE. It wasn't just an imperial collapse, it was this deep political disintegration across northern India. And suddenly you had these previously obscure regions, maybe just tribal lands before, kind of exploding onto the historical stage. They became the birthplaces of new independent powers. We saw ambitious new kingdoms like the Pushabhuris emerge up in Thanishvara, the Maukharis a bit further east, and the later Guptas a different line, mind you, down in Magadha and Malwa. Think of it like a patchwork quilt of ambitious regional kings all jostling for dominance.
Okay, and as we shift our gaze eastward, this whole dynamic played out with, well, pretty much equal force in Bengal. Here, around the 6th century CE, two powerful independent kingdoms really solidified their hold, Vanga and Gauda. Our focus today is squarely on Gauda. Geographically, it initially covered the northern and most of the western parts of Bengal. Now, even though the old imperial Gupta hold might have been stronger here than in Vanga, and the later Guptas initially had the upper hand, a big struggle was brewing. By the mid-6th century, the later Guptas found themselves locked in this fierce war with the Maukharis, fighting over control of the really crucial Magadha region.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that we actually have Maukari inscriptions from that exact period, the mid-6th century. And they refer to, get this, warlike activities of the Gaudas living on the seashore and their eventual defeat, which apparently drove them towards the coast. So that gives us this intriguing little glimpse into their early presence and, their martial nature. It suggests they were a force to be reckoned with even before Shashanka. We also get insights from the Aryavanju Srimula, which is an important Buddhist text written sometime after the 6th century CE. It actually dedicates a whole chapter to the history of India, specifically mentioning Gauda and Magadha. These early mentions are, well, they're vital for understanding the landscape before Shashanka really emerges.
Okay, so let's really zoom in on this region, Gauda itself. The city of Gauda, I think it's better known by its ancient name, Gaud, right?
That's one Gaud.
Its history stretches back quite a way then. It's first mentioned by the grammarian Panini, apparently. It wasn't just a city, it was a significant janapada, which is basically, an ancient territorial state or kingdom in ancient and medieval Bengal.
Exactly, a Janapada.
And the Arthashastra, that famous treatise on statecraft, mentions it right alongside Vanga, Pundra, and Kamarupa, so it was clearly important early on. Its core ancient territories, you're saying, are places like Murshidabad, Birbhum, and western Burdwan, and it was known to scholars like Vatsyayana centuries before Shashanka even came along.
Absolutely. And to give you a concrete date, the earliest actual epigraphic evidence, inscriptions referring to the Gauda people's territory comes from the Haraha inscription. That belongs to the Maukari king Ishana Varman, and it's dated to 554 AD. But the real expansion of Gauda's territory, that undoubtedly came with Shashanka emerging as this powerful emperor in the early 7th century AD. We have traveler accounts, like from the famous Chinese monk Hunsang. He mentioned traveling from Karnasuvarna, which was Shashanka's capital, all the way to a city in coastal Orissa that was under Shashanka's control.
Wow, okay, so that clearly shows Gauda's reach extended way down to West Bengal's coast then.
Right. And Banapada's Harsashrita, which is a really key text from that era, explicitly identifies Shashanka as the Lord of Gauda and confirms Karnasuvarna as his capital.
And this brings us right to the man himself, Shashanka, his very first mention. It's incredible. It's found on a 7th century seal in a hill fort in Rotasgar, which is a small town in Magadha. And the seal just had this really short but significant inscription, Mahasamanta Shashankadeva, which gives us a huge clue about his origins, right? He most likely began his career as a feudatory chief, a Mahasamanta, probably serving under Mahasenagupta of the later Gupta dynasty. But here's where it gets really interesting. By about 605 CE, right after Mahasenagupta's death, Shashanka had established what we now know as the Gauda Kingdom. Think about that jump from a subordinate chief to an independent, powerful ruler. That takes some serious audacity and, well, strategic brilliance.
Exactly. And from his newly established kingdom, what does he do? He immediately starts issuing gold coins to celebrate his triumph.
Yeah.
It's a very clear symbol of his new status, you know. He starts being addressed as Maharaja, King of Great Kings. That's a powerful title. It shows his imperial ambitions.
Yeah.
And it's for these reasons that Shashanka is, well, widely considered the first truly important king of ancient Bengal. He ruled approximately between 600 AD and maybe 625 AD.
Sure.
And his reign is actually pretty well documented. We have various inscriptions, including dated ones from Midnapore, copper plates from his subordinate rulers confirming his reach down into Orissa. Even records from his enemies, like Harsha, give us crucial information about him. And a true mark of his independent sovereignty, he also issued his own gold and silver coins, the dinars.
Dinars, okay.
And quite remarkably, Shashanka is also seen as the pioneer of the Bengali calendar. Its starting date actually falls right during his reign. So that's a lasting cultural legacy right there.
So Shashanka is consistently called the ruler of Gauda in, well, pretty much all the sources, inscriptions, literary accounts. And while Gauda, maybe in a narrower sense, refers to that territory between the Padma River and the Bardhamana region, it's clear that under Shashanka, Gauda really grew to embrace a much wider area, expanding its influence and control quite significantly.
Precisely. To illustrate that expansion, there's this text, the Shakta Sangama Tantra. It's a tantric text. It mentions Gauda extending from the Vanga country, that's eastern Bengal, all the way up to Bhubaneswar in Orissa.
Wow, that's a huge strip.
It really is. And it's highly probable the author was describing this area with Shashanka's kingdom in mind, because it did incorporate a big chunk of Orissa. Now, regarding his military, specific references are a bit limited, but we know that, much like the late Gupta army before it, Shashanka's forces had strong infantry and cavalry. The Gauda army also fielded a powerful elephant corps. This was particularly evident in campaigns up in Kamarupa. And interestingly, the Kamarupa king, Varman, even described the Gauda army as having a strong naval force too.
A navy as well. Interesting.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, by the end of his reign, Shashanka's domain stretched impressively, basically from Vanga right across to Bhubaneswar and bordering Kamarupa in the east. This was a truly substantial regional power he'd built.
And Shashanka wasn't afraid to use that military power, was he? One of his early moves seems to have been a campaign against the Varmans of Kamarupa, that's modern Assam. It looks like between, say, 595 and 600 CE, the Gauda army launched some major attacks against the Varman king Varman. The Dubi copper plate inscriptions actually describe this conflict. They talk about how the Gauda army fought and defeated Varman's sons, Varma and Sapratistita, and they specifically mention a mighty elephant force.
Right. The princes were apparently taken back to Gauda as prisoners, although they were released fairly soon after. Supposedly, they went back to their kingdom as feudatories under Shashanka. But it's worth remembering that the younger one, Varman, would later turn against Gauda and become a pretty major enemy.
Ah, okay. Foreshadowing there.
Indeed. So Shashanka's next big project, maybe his first crucial task as an independent ruler, was taking back Magadha from the Maukharis. And to do this, Shashanka formed a really key strategic alliance with Dasgupta, the king of Malava. Together, they waged war against the Maukhari king Varman. Now, the sequence of events here is critical and a bit grim. Varman gets killed by Dasgupta. Then, in retaliation, Rajavardhana, who's the new king of Tanishwar, and Varman's brother-in-law, defeated and killed Dasgupta.
Okay, a lot of killing.
Yes. But then Rajavardhana himself was killed in an encounter with Shashanka.
By Shashanka, or just during the encounter?
Well, that's the murky bit. The only source for this particular detail, Rajavardhana's death at Shashanka's hands, or at least in his presence, is the Harsha Charita. That was written by Bhamohan, who is Harsha's court poet and childhood friend. And crucially, neither Bana nor Harsha were actually present when Rajavardhana died.
Ah, so we have to consider the source and potential bias, right? It's Harsha's side of the story, essentially.
Exactly. It raises that important question about historical perspective.
A very crucial point. So, with Rajavardhana gone, his younger brother Harsha takes over as ruler of Thanisar in 606 CE. And his immediate goal is crystal clear: punish Shashanka. Harsha, showing some strategic sense himself, forms this powerful alliance with Varman. Yes, that same king of Kamarupa who used to be Shashanka's feudatory.
The enemy of my enemy.
Pretty much. And Harshavardhana eventually expands his own power, becoming the ruler of Kanyakupja, or Kanauj as well. So now you've got this major showdown brewing. Shashanka and his allies versus Harsha and his allies. A real clash of the titans for that time.
It really was. And the outcome of this big battle, well, it seems it was actually inconclusive. Shashanka did have to pull back from Kanauj, which you could call a strategic loss for him, certainly. But despite that setback, Shashanka continued to rule his own empire quite vigorously. His kingdom still included northern Orissa and those southern deltaic regions of Bengal. It shows he was still very much in control of a large territory.
So not a knockout blow by Harsha then.
Doesn't seem like it, no. Now, fast forward towards the end of Harsha's career, maybe around 640 to 643 AD. By then, we do see Harsha's authority firmly established in southeastern Bihar and Orissa. And around that same time, Bhaskara Varman, Harsha's ally, appears to have finally conquered Karnasuvarna, Shashanka's old capital. Now, these events most likely happened after Shashanka had already died, because the historical records largely go silent on him after about 625 AD, and we definitely see Gauda power declining after that point.
Okay, that timing makes sense.
It's important, though, to mention that Buddhist text again, the Aryamanjushrimulakalpa. It actually suggests Shashanka was defeated by Harsha at a battle in Pundravartana and only reigned for 17 years. But, honestly, that account isn't really supported by any other contemporary sources. In fact, we have newly discovered inscriptions belonging to Shashanka from southern Midnapore. They record the existence of something called the Dandabukti Janapada, which combine parts of Midnapore and Orissa, strongly suggesting he continued to rule those areas.
So, conflicting accounts again.
Exactly. And this raises that important question. How do we weigh these different sources when they paint such different pictures? It's a challenge historians constantly face.
Absolutely. It really highlights how perspective shapes history. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about Shashanka's actual rule and administration. I mean, at first glance, he definitely comes across as a warlike monarch, doesn't he? All these invasions and conquests seem geared towards growing his kingdom aggressively.
He certainly had that side, yes.
But, like many kings of that era, he clearly understood it wasn't just about conquest. You had to consolidate your position too. And we see that in his smart political alliances, right? Like teaming up with Dasgupta of Malva. That was a clever move to counter the power of Harsha's coalition.
Very shrewd, yes. Balancing power.
And in terms of running the kingdom, he seems to have kept things going. He continued many Gupta-era traditions, like giving land grants to Brahmins. We have copperplate inscriptions showing that. And economically, as you said, he issued his own gold and silver coins, the dinars. So he was managing the state effectively.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is this blend of military strength and, well, cultural activity. Shashanka was also a very vigorous promoter of Hinduism. He actively invited different groups of Brahmins, like Sakatvipi and Vedic Brahmins, into his kingdom, probably from places like Kanyakubja. This suggests he was trying to build up a specific religious and social order.
Right, actively shaping the religious landscape.
Exactly. And in terms of arts and culture, some historians argue that the unique Gauda style of composition, especially in poetry, actually developed in the courts of the princes of Bengal, who were none other than these lords of Gauda. And, as we mentioned before, that really significant cultural legacy. The Bengali calendar is thought to have started under his reign.
Okay, now let's circle back to how this history has been told and the issue of bias in the sources. It really seems like the Chinese pilgrim Huensung, who was, let's face it, enjoying Harsha's patronage, became pretty partisan against Shashanka, Harsha's main rival.
That certainly appears to be the case. His account needs to be read with that context in mind.
And then there's Bana, Harsha's court poet. The language he uses against Shashanka is, well, pretty strong, vitriolic even. He apparently never even referred to Shashanka by his actual name, maybe because Shashanka means Shiva, and Bana himself was a devout Shaiva. That's an interesting theory.
It is plausible. Shiva is the moon-crested one, and Shashanka means moon.
Instead, Bana used these insults like Gauda Bujanga, Serpent of Gauda, or Gauda Dhamma, Scoundrel of Gauda. I mean, that's not exactly objective historical reporting, is it?
Not at all. It screams contempt. And this brings us to a really crucial point about the religious dynamics of the time. Shashanka, as we said, was a strong champion of Brahmanical religion, a devout Shaiva. He seems to have had little sympathy for Buddhism. And Buddhism, interestingly, was getting a lot of patronage from wealthy merchant classes, and perhaps most importantly, from Harshavardhana himself, Shashanka's great enemy.
Ah, so a religious dimension to their rivalry, too.
Very likely. Shashanka's stance probably didn't sit well with Buddhists at the time. And adding fuel to the fire, Harshavardhana's own actions, his clear pro-Buddhist stance, and what some sources call a bloody suppression of Brahmins. During that assembly in Kanauj, apparently led to real despair among Brahmanical followers. We hear about many of them migrating eastward, towards Bengal and Kamarupa.
Migrating because of Harsha's policies.
It seems that way. Hunseng himself mentions seeing a large influx of learned Brahmins in Kamarupa, where Bhaskar Varman, Harsha's ally, was granting them lands. Hunseng even went so far as to claim Harsha was basically born on behalf of the Bodhisattva specifically to punish Shashanka, painting him as this great hater of Buddhism, and he cited a couple of instances of Shashanka's supposed anti-Buddhist actions.
Okay, that sounds pretty biased again.
It does. But as a counterpoint, we have to remember that despite these claims, major Buddhist institutions like the University at Nalanda, where Hunseng himself studied, continued to flourish. And there were several monasteries, like the Raktamrittika Mahavihara, located very near Shashanka's own capital, Karnasuvarna, that clearly existed within his kingdom.
So the reality was probably more complex than just Shashanka the Buddhist hater.
Almost certainly. It suggests a much more nuanced picture. And this ties into stories about migrations of Brahmin groups to Bengal, possibly invited by Shashanka himself. This large-scale migration, though perhaps initially welcomed, seems to have had really profound long-term socioeconomic effects. It arguably shaped class distinctions and social structures in Bengal for centuries, maybe making things more rigid than they had been under later Buddhist rulers like the Pallas, and setting the stage for the Sena dynasty, who really championed Brahmanical religions.
It's fascinating how these events ripple down through centuries. Okay, so pulling it all together, what does this all mean for Shashanka's ultimate legacy? After he died, things fell apart pretty quickly, didn't they?
They really did. His son Manava only ruled for about 8 months.
8 months?
Yeah, very short reign. And the Gauda Kingdom, which Shashanka had worked so hard to build and unify, was soon carved up between Harsha and Bhaskara Varman of Kamarupa. Bhaskara Varman even managed to conquer Karnasuvarna, Shashanka's old capital.
So what does this all mean? What's the takeaway on Shashanka?
Well, the chaos that erupted right after his death really underscores his achievement. The historian Akshay Kumar Maitreya put it beautifully. Commenting on Gauda's symbolism, he said something like, "The whole of Gai was once known as Gacha Desh. The Bengali language only a few days ago was known as Gacha Basha. Even now, Bengalis are known as Gacha. So if one attempts to write our history, one must begin with Gaur."
Wow. That really puts Gauda and Shashanka at the heart of Bengali identity.
Absolutely. His unification, and importantly, his defense of these separate local kingdoms, Vanga, Samata, Gauda, against a powerhouse like Harsha. That's seen as absolutely seminal in forming the very idea of Bengal as a political entity. Many historians argue Shashanka wasn't just the first independent king of Gauda, but effectively the first independent king of Bengal. He becomes this symbolic figure for regional independence, for self-rule.
A founding father figure, almost.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
His real achievement, bringing all these diverse groups under one banner, maybe only becomes truly clear when you see the fragmentation and chaos that hit Bengal the moment he was gone and the Gauda Kingdom collapsed.
What an incredible journey that was, exploring the life and times of Shashanka. A figure who literally helped shape the geography and identity of a region that, let's be honest, is often overlooked in the grand sweep of history. From starting out as basically a feudatory chief, he rose to become the architect of a unified Bengal, facing down empires, navigating these incredibly complex religious and political currents. It's just a powerful reminder that history is often made by individuals whose names we might not immediately recognize, but whose impact was profound.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how figures like Shashanka, operating right at these crossroads, declining empires, rising new powers, often lay the groundwork, maybe unseen at the time, for future national or regional identities. You have to wonder, what other unheralded leaders might have similar deep legacies just waiting for us to uncover? And perhaps more importantly, it really prompts us, as you said, to think critically about how historical narratives get shaped. Whose perspective are we hearing? It encourages us always to look for that full kaleidoscope of history, not just one single viewpoint.
A truly profound thought to end on. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.